Hello everyone, it's Jin'taan here. Now, on Tuesday I put out a video that went over the latest patch, along with a little bit of analysis on some of its likely impacts. And perhaps predictably, about an hour after that went live, CCP decided to drop a blog that was somehow even more important than that rather stacked patch. Now, I'll be reading that whole thing verbatim later, but as I know I only retain about 70% of you past the first 2 to 3 minutes, let me just hit you with the cliff notes right away. CCP has finally decided to act on a subject that they've talked about for the past few years, which is their perception that the amount of ore available in EVE is far too high, and that its static nature dissuades people from going to war, as they have all of the materials that they need within their own space. And we saw the first element of that in the patch notes that I went over on Tuesday, with heavy nerfs to ore anomalies in all areas of space, but especially Sov nullsec, where we saw a reduction of 90% to the smallest sites and around 70% to the largest, including a major reduction of the size of asteroids spawned that causes mining to be significantly less efficient with larger ships such as rockhauls, which can't move as easily between rocks. As I mentioned at the time, I didn't think that that would have a huge impact on the overall ore supply, as Athanors can create just under double the ore volume of a pre-nerf colossal anomaly for every 60-day cycle, and given that most nullsec regions have over 720 moons, which is what you need to pop one of those every 2 hours, there would still be plenty of ore to go around. It seems, however, that CCP was well aware of this, and as announced in the dev blog coming for the 26th of February, is a complete removal of normal ores, so Veldspar, Spodumene, Arcanor, etc. from Athanors, alongside adjustments to what moon ores provide when refined and the amount of volume that is produced per moon cycle. Now, those adjustments remain unelaborated upon, but given the general tone of this dev blog, we can readily assume that it's going to be a nerf to both sides. And all of this comprises what CCP calls their shortage phase, which they intend to follow up with a redistribution phase, and then finally a dynamic distribution phase. So the too long didn't watch is beginning in March. We're going to be seeing a reduction in the amount of ore that's coming into the economy of the game by a minimum of 60 to 70%. And later on in the year, CCP is going to be looking at massively shifting the economic paradigm in order to try and disincentivize staying in one spot. Alright, so I'll be throwing in my 0.02 ISK later on in the video, but I always think that it's worth giving you guys the source material that I'm working from before that. So if you've already read the dev blog yourself, you can just hit the timestamp in the description below to skip right to my analysis. But otherwise, here's exactly what CCP released on this topic. Dear Capsuleers, last December, the endeavour towards a healthier mineral distribution throughout New Eden began. Whilst this is a complex task, changes will be implemented in phases over a period of time to propel the project towards its ultimate goal, a dynamic mineral distribution system that will self-regulate based on inputs and outputs. Of course, that is easier said than done, and the road to get there is long and fraught with peril. Drastic changes are being made that will be felt throughout the ecosystem, but there is confidence that they are positive changes for the long-term health of EVE Online. The plan consists of 3 phases: the shortage phase, the redistribution phase, and the dynamic distribution phase. The shortage phase is a mandatory step in order to get the data that is needed, so that what constitutes a healthy distribution for the current player base can be identified and understood. This step will also allow factors that should be considered during the creation of the dynamic system to be listed. Currently, there are 3 to 5 steps within this phase. The first step was executed last December, and the second step is going live with this patch. The next step will be going live sometime next month. As explained in December, communication of the details is sensitive, and there are huge interests at stake. Nevertheless, there is a need to give out a high-level overview about the next step. Upcoming moon mineral distribution changes. Since moon mining is a time-sensitive activity that relies on multiple time windows, by giving you a heads up and allowing for some time, you can adjust your plans accordingly. During the next release, a significant change in how minerals are distributed on moons is planned. You should expect the following changes. 1. Complete removal of all basic ore types from all moons. 2. Adjustments on ore volume extracted per day per moon. And 3. Adjustments on moon ore type yields of basic minerals. It is understood that the changes that will go live throughout Phase 1 will affect the macroeconomic environment, and the market reaction will be closely monitored. Predictions have been made, and the readiness to take measures is in place. After all, the industry is an integral part of how minerals are consumed, and as such it plays a great role in the mineral market's behaviour, as well as current stockpiles in inventory. No stone will be left unturned in the mission towards a better future. Fly safe. And that's the end of the dev blog. So cards on the table before we continue. I am someone who absolutely has a vested interest in Athanor mining. I own a large number of moons and I actively mine them, although these moons are in high sec and not null sec. And along with skill farming, it's kind of the majority of my income. Even with that though, I don't think that this is necessarily a bad change, and in fact this shortage phase that they're going through is something that almost certainly had to happen. Just making generic changes here isn't going to really impact that much when it comes to the macroeconomic picture, because if you take a look at specific ore prices, and more accurately mineral prices, you'll see that a lot of the ways that prices have fluctuated over the past couple of years due to the overproduction of ABC ores by nullsec has drastically reduced the value of high-end T1 minerals with regards to the rest of the market, as those were no longer the actual bottleneck for production. The bottleneck had become the lower end ores, specifically tritanium and to a lesser degree mexilon, which is why ores such as Veldspar were, despite being incredibly common, the best ores to mine anyway in high sec, as it represented the greatest kind of disparity between demand and supply within the market. Whereas supposedly rare ores like kernite and omber that primarily produced isogen were almost completely worthless, and it wasn't worth your time mining them even if they were available. And whilst many nullsec organizations won't actually have direct stockpiles, the matter of the fact is that their stockpiles exist in other people's hangars. They exist in market traders, they exist in people who have speculated in the ore market over the past couple of years, that sort of thing. And there is definitely a need to flush that all out of the system before any actual new changes in ore distribution can impact the market meaningfully. Looking beyond why this shortage phase is necessary though, we have to look at the point of, is there too much ore coming into the economy? And again, despite my invested interests, I do absolutely have to say yes. Whilst supply has been below demand for the past, I think, 3 to 4 months, that's mostly a symptom of the oversupply in the market from months previous that's just been slowly getting churned through naturally because the actual prices of minerals have dissuaded mining in the first place, at least from my very, very non-expert market analysis. What I do disagree with though is this idea that this abundance of resources is what's causing people to not want to go to war with one another. What's causing people to not want to go to war with one another, from my perspective, is A, the lack of actual benefits in doing so, and B, the lack of an ability to actually hold large swathes of territory, which is a fundamental design principle in Aegis of to try and create fallow space when new alliances can form and grow themselves up, as we've actually seen in the aftermath of the Glassing of the North, with the really interesting stuff going on in Veil of the Silent and the rise of Trigger Happy in Tribute. And something that really worries me about this eventual intended end goal of dynamic resource distribution, whilst it is very, very interesting, is the fact that it's creating this massively contrasting push and pull effect on alliances. Because on one hand, the ADMs mean that you want to be working in and protecting and mining in your core territories so that you can keep the ADMs high and keep those territories secure, whilst the dynamic resource system is going to be pulling you towards the fringes of your territory, the frontiers, to be able to mine there so that you can get the best reward. And maybe that is something that's going to add a kind of risk-reward dynamic, but given the way that things have gone in the past with CCP just heavily nerfing things they see as problems, I'm worried that you're going to end up in a position where you just can't keep up ADMs in your core territory for a long period of time. And that's going to be very, very disruptive to one of the things that is a big idea in EVE Online, which is you conquer a region, you make it your home, and you live there. And taking that away is something that is very worrying to me, especially given my past history of being part of Providence, which has pretty much for the entire history of the game sat in one region and just tried to create its own culture, build its own rules, and have fun in nullsec. It seems like punishing them for that insistence on staying in one place and not expanding is very backwards to me, at least. Even if they are an exception to how most alliances and coalitions operate, you do have to consider outliers like that, especially given I know from previous interactions with devs that they consider Providence one of the healthier places in EVE Online. And alongside all of this is my main concern, which is that CCP primarily here just appears to be attacking the symptom of the problem rather than the problem itself. From my perspective, the problem is not the game is generating too much ore, the problem is economic interdiction takes way too much effort to be viable for smaller entities. You can't interrupt a goon mining session with 10-15 dudes out on a roam like you could have done, in 2013, 2014. And that, from my perspective, is where the real problem lies. In the supercapital umbrella's ability to disrupt subcapitals, in the panic existing at all, in basically the Rockall being able to mine at all. Those kind of upscaling of the EHP and barrier to entry to being able to disrupt people is the real problem that is causing the symptom of there being too much ore in the game. And not addressing that fundamentally is something that I think is just going to lead to it being leveraged in a different avenue. I'm going to be very interested to see what the ratting statistics start to say over March and April, as that's when we'll see people, in my opinion, just swap to things like super carrier ratting, maybe even carrier ratting, maybe Titan ratting, something like that will enable them to still make money safely in a small and concentrated area under a super capital umbrella. And all this will do is reduce the amount of ore in the game, and that's not what the real problem was, at least in my opinion. People still aren't going to be able to run in there and make content against these big coalitions because they'll still have the tools that they need to shut that down pretty much immediately, and therefore dissuade people from doing it again in the future, and that makes people not have fun in the game, which is the larger overarching problem that EVE Online has right now, that it's too difficult to have fun. Now, none of this is really a solid argument against these changes taking place, and it's not intended to be. At the end of the day, if CCP thinks that addressing this symptom is super important, and they're planning to maybe get to the overarching problems later on, then that's perfectly fine. That's their prerogative, it's their game, and I don't think that these changes are particularly bad, as I've said time and time again. It's just that, in my opinion, this isn't going to have the impact on the way the nullsec solve politics game is played that they want it to. It's just going to have an impact on how wealth generation is done within that system. I think that if CCP wants to see more fighting done between people who border each other and less stagnancy in borders and political relationships, the best way to do that is to give people an incentive to punch their neighbour in the face rather than actually taking their territory, but something that they can hold within their opponent's territory that provides a reward to them. Old POS moon mining actually provided something that was hugely important to this, and with it not existing anymore, you just don't have this kind of natural leaning towards wanting to expand your borders constantly that you did in the past. So you only see these massive strategic campaigns where everything's laid out, people have all their allies ready to go, and then they just hit a place, they take the space, and it was never going to be really a huge contest. That's something that we've seen for the past, 1 to 2 years. That's how warfare has developed in EVE Online. And the only way to really wind that back is to make it so that people accidentally stumble their way into wars more often. And the best way to do that is to provide more tactical objectives and less strategic ones. So something that's relatively small, something that 20 to 30 to 50 people fight over, that can then have the potential to escalate into something much bigger as time goes on and more of these objectives are captured. But then again, to recognise my own biases, I am an FC, I'm someone who would obviously want more power to start wars put in my own hands than put into the politicians and the diplomats and that kind of thing. So maybe I am just hoping for a return to the way things used to be when I was much more active in the forefront of playing EVE Online, rather than just talking about it on the internet. Anyway, that wraps up this completely unscripted ramble of my thoughts on these changes and the impacts that they might have, as well as just the general state of EVE and how this change plays into it. Please feel free to let me know your own thoughts in the comments below, I'm always interested to hear them. And also I guess what you thought of this more raw gut reactions style of video, because it's not something I've really done much before, and I'm interested to know if you enjoy it. But before we go, a special thanks as always goes out to our Crassuses, Pinche Infidel from Old School, Brood from Triumvirate, Zolka Lando, and Jessica, as well as to our other $5 and above patrons in January Valentine, Ketzark Odin, Big Bada Boom, Czar, Dunk Dinkle, Miss Moses, Raphael Dordiens, Kem, and the Ashfell Federation. If you want to join them in supporting the channel yourself, you can either check out the Patreon link in the description below, or if you want, just share the video with some other people who you think might enjoy it. Until next time, have a good day and fly smart.